As someone who used to be an agnostic, semi-atheist myself, I found it hard to believe the notion of God. Perhaps I was influenced by Rick and Morty. Perhaps I was influenced by so many different TV shows and games that I used to binge all the time. I wasn't a firm believer in the faith. Yeah, I did go to a C of E primary school, but I never really believed in it. Even though they kept talking about Jesus, they didn't explain who he really was, or delve into the scriptures that make people fall in love with him. It felt like more they were teaching as a requirement, an actual belief in love. That's why for most of my high school years and college, I fell away from the faith. Never believing that nothing was there, but I was mostly agnostic, believing that there is, because people I know have experienced unexplainable paranormal activities in the past. So I always believed there was something, but I never knew what was after death. But then I started getting repeated ads for the Hallow app all over my devices, all on my phone. I saw that Mark Wahlberg, actually a practicing Catholic Christian, so I checked out the Bible for myself. I'll be honest, when I first read Genesis and that, I was very dismissive, because I know evolution is a fact, and I like to study biology, and I'm interested in the universe, planets, physics. But as I start reading through the many relevant lessons throughout the Torah and the New Testament, particularly the book of Job, which delves into how to deal with suffering, the story of Samson and Delilah, of believing someone's beauty and allowing them to manipulate you, classic story of David and Goliath, of a supposed insignificant nobody who rose above his station, who took down a great Philistine and eventually became the king of Israel. Prophet Ezekiel, who became a mouthpiece for his people during the exile. Prophet Elijah, who stood up to a false cult that worshipped the false god Baal and who actually saw God himself. And of course, during the Maccabean revolt with Judas Maccabeus, against all odds defeated the Greek army, which is where the story of Hanukkah comes from, with the candles burning. And then there was Yeshua of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, who every word that came out of his mouth was gold. Parables that I read daily that help me through my day-to-day life, that give me a sense of calm that nothing on this earth could ever do. Jesus spoke so many great things that I've highlighted nearly half of the things he said throughout the Gospels. I used to dismiss because I couldn't hear him, because I couldn't see him. Then I realized slowly over time, God doesn't communicate typically as we do. He communicates through our heart and through our mind. It's something that cannot be explained, which I still cannot figure it out myself, because I've learned that some things in this universe cannot be explained. We are limited. We haven't even fully grasped the full scope of the universe yet. For us to so arrogantly proclaim that there is no God makes no sense. We're not even sure what lies beyond the Milky Way galaxy. We don't know what's out there. And to dismiss anything just because we can't hear and see it is so close-minded. I know for a fact that there are some things in this universe that cannot ever be explained, that science, which I love, can never explain. Because we are trying to understand the universe with our limited human minds. We can study things that are physical, that we can feel, but there are things beyond us that we cannot see, hear, feel, taste, or touch. And God is one of them. We cannot explain everything. And this Catholic priest here explains it well.
And welcome strangers. It just seems to me that gods were an invention of ancient people to explain things they didn't understand. We know how the world works now. Why keep this silly belief? While I understand where this question comes from, I think it's a bit condescending to our ancestors. Sure, we've made huge strides in science and technology, but do we really think that we have continued to progress in every area of knowledge? I'm not so sure that our art is as good as it's ever been. Our poetry, our family structures, relationship with the natural world, sense of morality, awe and wonder. There are things that our forebears knew and understand that, frankly, we've lost touch with, and plenty of things in our world that science and technology will never be able to fully explain. Isn't it possible that people before us knew something that we didn't? How can you believe in God without any evidence? For most agnostic people, this is the biggest hang-up with religion. There's no empirical proof, and that's correct. But there is more to truth than what we can see and can measure. Beauty, goodness, love, inspiration. These things can't be quantified or proven beyond a doubt, and even if we could pinpoint the neurons and brain chemistry that help us experience these things, do you really think that they would be sufficient to explain what they mean to us? For me, at least, there is a mystery to the universe, a wonder beyond words that proof cannot capture. Why doesn't God reveal himself to everyone? Yes, this is the follow-up question to that. At least there could be some proof, you say. Why couldn't God pop out of the sky every so often and say something? Wouldn't that make things a lot easier? I think there are three things to say here. One, he did. At least according to the witnesses of Scripture, to the stories of people who had visions, to the example of Jesus himself. God did just that, and people refused to believe in miracles. Doubters will always find reasons to doubt. Number two, when would it stop? Would Jesus have to be born, die, and rise again in every age to every people for us to believe? It seems pretty impractical to say the least. And three, where would that leave faith? If God were someone who could just be measured and tested, then we would be left with no choice but to believe. Gravity exists whether we believe it or not. But this is not how faith works, and there is something critically important about having to trust and to take a leap of faith. You do know that there's no evidence that Jesus even existed, right? Technically, this is true. Not only is there no video, photographic, or DNA evidence of a man named Jesus in the first century, there's no archaeological record Christians can point to as undeniable proof. But then again, neither is there any such evidence for someone like Genghis Khan or most people in the ancient world. What we have are first-hand witness accounts, stories, and a world clearly turned upside down by his presence, but no proof. Are you doubting Genghis Khan's existence too? We know that Jesus existed because of multiple attestations in the various writings of Scripture, the accounts of the Roman historian Josephus, and the fact that literally thousands of people claimed to be Christians by the middle of the first century. For a guy that didn't exist, seems pretty unlikely. Why Christianity over other religions? This is as much a personal question for me as it is a theological one. Christianity is unique in its theology of the Trinity and incarnation. God does not simply watch from afar, neither does he procreate and form half-gods. He became part of creation while maintaining his divinity. There is such beauty to me in the humble sacrifice and such hope in the fact that God came to be like us so that we could become like him. Other religions obviously include divine revelation and a sense of heaven, but none as intimate as Christianity. How can you believe in a God who condemns a good person to hell just because they were of the wrong religion? I don't. Simply put, while I believe that salvation is through Christ alone and that he established his church on earth to be a guide and gateway to heaven, I don't for a second believe that God is bound by human conventions. All religions capture some truth of God. I don't believe that they're the clearest picture, but there is no doubt that they spark inspiration and plant mystery into souls, hopefully developing virtue. If a Muslim, Jew, or Buddhist comes face to face with God upon their death and says, "Yes, this is exactly what I was seeking in my religion, I just didn't know what I was missing," there is not a doubt in me that God will welcome them into himself. Why does God allow suffering? This is the quintessential question, right? People have asked this for thousands of years with thousands of different responses. Obviously, free will plays a big part in this, and if someone chooses bad things that have inevitable consequences, people are going to get hurt. But I don't think that that really gets at the heart of the question, because God could still intervene, but doesn't always. And the reason, I believe, is because suffering is not always bad or without merit. We willingly suffer at the gym and go on diets. Women freely go through labor and raise children. Some people love horror movies and watch tragedies. Why? Because sometimes suffering purifies us, makes us stronger, gives us perspective, takes away our fear, brings immense fulfillment in surviving it, and even leads to something much greater than we ever knew. The problem with our human lives sometimes is that we are so short-sighted. We can only see the present and only care about our immediate needs. God can see the whole picture, and his ultimate goal is to draw us out of this world into the next. Sometimes a touch of suffering here is exactly what we need for eternity. I just can't accept an organization that is homophobic. Homophobia is a sin. To fear or to hate something or someone is not the plan that God has for anyone. And so if religion is truly homophobic, systematically seeking to cause harm in another, this is a problem. That said, there is nothing inherently homophobic about Christianity in general or the Catholic Church in particular. For Catholics, at least, there are two inherent purposes to all sexual activity: procreation and union. Any action that denies either of these possibilities falls short of God's plan and reduces sex to merely an act of pleasure. This, for us, is immoral, and we must call people to something higher, but our true faith neither condemns people nor looks down on someone for their thoughts or attractions. I feel like Jesus was just a good guy. His disciples made up the resurrection to keep the word going. Interestingly enough, this was actually a concept explored in the Martin Scorsese film The Last Temptation of Christ. In it, Jesus comes down from the cross, but Paul continues to preach the good news, prompting Jesus to call him a fraud, because there can be no good news without the cross. It's an intriguing argument for those who don't believe, I'm sure, but I don't think that Christianity would have had any lasting success without people actually seeing him risen from the dead. Remember, the Gospels themselves paint the first disciples as pretty incompetent. I don't think they had it in them. And lastly, I tried praying, but didn't hear anything. Well, join the club. I say this not to dismiss your comment, but to calm you. This is the way that God works. The Bible often notes that God speaks through whispers. The mystics claim that God's language is silence. Even some of the most zealous of saints admit that they went through periods of struggle, unsure of God's presence. For me, this is not proof that God doesn't exist, but rather a tactic of God to slow us down and to draw us closer. We must strain not our ears, but our minds and our hearts. It takes practice, dedication, patience, and a lot of faith to hear God when he speaks, but he does. He may not be as clear as a phone call, and you may doubt that you heard anything at all, but I can assure you that I have felt the burning within my heart, drawing my mind into unimaginable mystery. For those who have yet to experience this, it may sound like utter nonsense, and I get it. But if you've made it this far into this video, there must be something speaking to